There are moments in history so shrouded in silence that even the greatest chronicles seem unable to pierce their darkness. The final night of Jesus of Nazareth is one of those moments. It hangs at the edge of time like a candle seen in the distance, flickering between memory and myth. For centuries, Christians looked to the canonical Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, to understand those last hours before the crucifixion. Yet across the mountains of Ethiopia, preserved in ancient monasteries and written in the sacred Guizi language, lies a tradition that speaks in a voice rarely heard by the outside world. It whispers of prayers uttered in secret, teachings spoken in the stillness of night, and revelations that never entered the Western canon. This Ethiopian tradition is not a modern invention, nor a sensationalized discovery pulled from sensational mythology. It is a product of one of the oldest Christian civilizations on earth, a civilization whose scriptures contain books long removed from Western Bibles, preserved faithfully in parchment manuscripts dating back more than a millennium. Within these manuscripts, scholars have found fragments and references to a text often called by Ethiopian monks the Gospel of the Night Watch or the Testament of the Savior, a work describing what Jesus told his disciples in the hours after the Last Supper and before his arrest in Gethsemane. While Western scholars categorize it within the family of apocryphal or extra-canonical writings, Ethiopian Christianity treats many such works as part of a broader, sacred heritage that complements the canonical Gospels rather than contradicting them. To understand the significance of this text, one must first understand Ethiopia's unique role in the preservation of early Christian literature. Christianity reached the Aksumite Empire by the 4th century, making Ethiopia one of the first nations in history to embrace the faith on a state level. Over centuries, monks retreated to highland monasteries, carrying manuscripts across valleys and cliffs, copying them by candlelight, and sealing them within stone churches carved directly into the mountains. In places like Debre Libanos, Debre Damo, and the secret monastic communities surrounding Lake Tana, the written word was treated as both divine testimony and national treasure. It is in these monasteries that scholars in the modern era encountered manuscripts that reference the lost gospel describing Christ's final teachings before the crucifixion. While no complete copy of this gospel has yet been found, the quotations and paraphrases preserved in Ethiopian homilies, commentaries, and liturgical works provide a window into its content. Its tone is somber and intimate, portraying a Jesus who speaks not in parables but in direct spiritual instruction, addressing the agony he is about to face, the mission he must complete, and the legacy he entrusts to his disciples. According to the Ethiopian fragments, the night before the crucifixion was portrayed as a period of revelation rather than silence. Jesus is described as withdrawing with his disciples after the supper, not only to pray, but to speak clearly about the cosmic dimensions of the sacrifice that awaited him. The text preserves the moment in a way that resonates deeply with Ethiopian spirituality. Jesus is said to have spoken about creation, judgment, and the mystery of divine forgiveness, as though placing the events of the next day in the full context of the world's spiritual history. In one fragment preserved in a 15th century Ethiopian commentary, Jesus addresses the disciples with a mixture of sorrow and resolute strength. He is described as telling them that the trial he is about to face is not the triumph of his enemies, but the unveiling of the world's hidden sickness. He speaks of human violence as something older than nations, older than kings, and older than the temple, a force rooted in the dawn of human disobedience. His death, according to this text, will expose that sickness by drawing it toward himself like a physician draws out poison. This theme, while consistent with later Christian theology, appears in the Ethiopian material with vivid imagery that does not appear in the canonical Gospels. Another fragment, attributed to a monastic teaching known as the homily of the Passover night, describes Jesus speaking words of comfort to his disciples, assuring them that fear is not a sign of weakness but a natural response to the weight of destiny. He promises that the light he carries cannot be extinguished, even if his body is broken. In this tradition, Jesus uses metaphors deeply familiar to Ethiopian Christians. He likens his mission to the rising of the Ethiopian sun after a long rainy season, insisting that darkness cannot cling to the world forever. This imagery reflects the Ethiopian view of Christ as the radiant force behind creation itself, a theme emphasized throughout Ethiopian Orthodox liturgy. Perhaps the most striking element found in the Ethiopian tradition is a long prayer attributed to Jesus, said to have been spoken privately after the disciples fell asleep in Gethsemane. While the canonical Gospels record only that Jesus prayed in anguish, these Ethiopian fragments preserve the content of the prayer itself. In it, Jesus speaks not only to the Father, but also to future generations of believers. He asks that the suffering he endures might become a path toward healing for those who come after. He asks that humanity might someday recognize the truth that salvation is not an escape from suffering, but the transformation of it. This deeply mystical perspective reflects the spiritual theology of the Ethiopian Church, where Christ's suffering is viewed as both historical and cosmic, bridging time and eternity. The prayer also includes a profound reflection on human free will. Jesus is said to state that God does not force righteousness upon humanity, for love without freedom is not love at all. His death, then, becomes the ultimate act of offering rather than coercion. He asks that his followers throughout the generations learn to forgive not because they are commanded, but because forgiveness breaks the chains that bind the human spirit. This emphasis on spiritual liberation will become central to Ethiopian Christian teaching, influencing hymns, liturgical poetry, and theological commentaries for centuries. It is important to note that modern scholars cannot fully reconstruct the original form of the lost Ethiopian gospel. The fragments vary in length and detail, and some appear to be paraphrased by later scribes rather than direct quotations. Yet the themes are consistent enough to suggest a common origin, likely in early Jewish Christian documents circulating in the Near East before being preserved in the Ethiopian tradition. Its theological tone resembles other early Christian writings such as the Didache, the Odes of Solomon, and certain passages in the Book of Clement, all of which emphasize purity of heart, spiritual vigilance, and the cosmic meaning of Christ's suffering. What makes the Ethiopian witness unique is its insistence that the final night of Jesus was a moment of teaching rather than only sorrow. It portrays Jesus as fully aware of what awaits him and determined to prepare his disciples not simply through warnings but through wisdom. This perspective aligns with a broader Ethiopian understanding of Christ as both teacher and redeemer, a figure who enlightens even in the shadow of death. The existence of such a gospel does not diminish the authority of the canonical Gospels. Rather, it enriches the historical tapestry of early Christianity. It reminds modern readers that the early church was not a monolithic institution but a diverse community scattered across continents, each preserving aspects of the Christian story that reflected their spiritual experiences. Ethiopia, geographically isolated yet spiritually vibrant, became a guardian of texts and traditions that vanished elsewhere. The story of this lost gospel is, in many ways, a story about memory, how nations remember, how faith remembers, and how humanity preserves its most sacred narratives. Ethiopia remembered a Jesus who spoke deeply on the night before his crucifixion, a Jesus who comforted his followers with promises of light, who explained the mystery of suffering, and who prayed not only for his disciples but for every generation that would come after them. Whether one accepts the Ethiopian fragments as literal history or as spiritual interpretation, their significance cannot be ignored. They offer a window into how early Christians understood the meaning of Christ's final hours. They reveal a tradition in which Jesus' words on that sacred night echo through centuries of Ethiopian liturgy, monastic devotion, and historical memory. And they remind us that history is not only the story we inherit, but also the story we continue to uncover. In the end, the lost Ethiopian gospel does what all great historical revelations do. It challenges us to reconsider what we think we know, invites us to explore the past with humility, and enriches the spiritual heritage of millions. It speaks through the centuries with a voice that is gentle, sorrowful, and unwavering, just like the Christ it seeks to describe. And in that voice, preserved across the mountains of Ethiopia, the world hears again the whisper of a man facing death with divine courage, teaching his followers not to fear the darkness, for the dawn was already on its way.